So hello, my name's Ian Boyd and I work for Articology, and Articology is the organisation working with the Glades as part of this amazing festival, and also the conservation work, the work for wildlife at the shopping centre. And what we've got here in this tray under this amazing device is a world of small wildlife, and it's stuff that is at the Glades, it's in your garden, it's in your school playground. This is everyday wildlife, but we're going to have a closer look, so it'll be unusual because we can see some of that stuff really close up and get to understand it a bit better. So in this tray, there are bits of dead wood, there's some soil, it's just stuff scraped from underneath a log or from underneath a bit of paving stone. So it's everyday stuff, it's not special or unusual. So all the wildlife in here is what we might call everyday wildlife. It's the sort of thing that you can find everywhere, but we don't pay attention to it because we can't often see it as clearly as this. So this amazing microscope allows us to zoom in and zoom out and focus. And this very important thing is a wildlife spoon, and I'm going to use that just to scrape around in here. You can use anything, use your finger if you like, just to search underneath the bits of wood, move things aside and see what's crawling about underneath it. Most of the stuff in here likes damp soil, and we'll explain why in a moment. Doesn't really like the light, so it's going to go away from the light that's shining into the tray to a dark space underneath. So we need to move things aside to have a look at it. So it's all fine, and we put it all back at the end, so that's really important. All of this goes back where we found it. It'll be completely fine. But it gives us a chance just to have a bit of an explore. So wildlife safari of the sorts of things that are all around you all the time, and certainly at the Glades. So we're going to have a closer look. So on the screen, moving quite quickly for such a small thing, is a woodlouse. We'll move him back so we can see him slightly more clearly. There you go. So now a woodlouse is a really good, there's another one just behind it, look, there are two woodlouse there. So these are not insects. How do we know they're not insects? Well, we just have to count their legs. Most insects, almost all insects, have got 6 legs and 4 wings. Flies only have 2 wings, but they still have 6 legs. So 6 legs is a really good indicator of whether it's an insect or not. Woodlice have 14 legs, so they are most definitely not insects. And the fascinating thing is woodlice, which you must have seen. I'm sure you'll have turned over a bit of stone or a pot in your garden or something and found these things. But did you know that they are actually shrimps? So these are crustaceans. These are the same kind of animal as crabs and lobsters, things we think of as being sea life, as being marine wildlife. Well, woodlice are in the same kind of group, but they have found a way of living on land. So this is a shrimp that lives on land, but it's still a shrimp, and it still needs damp conditions. Oh, something's pinging about in there. We'll have a look for that in a moment. But because it's still a shrimp, let's see if we can get back onto a woodlouse so we can have a look at it as we're talking about it. It still needs to have nice, dark, damp conditions because it breathes through gills. Where are you, woodlouse? Let's turn some stuff over. This is, there we go. Look, we've got some over on this side where we've turned the wood over. There you go. Where's it gone? So if you're looking for woodlice, you need to look somewhere where it's dark and damp, because they breathe through their gills. There you go, a little cluster of woodlice there. Underneath their bodies, if we were to flip these over, we can just do that with the spoon. We don't want to pester it too much, but just underneath that woodlouse's body, just at the back end underneath, there are little white dots, and those are its gills. So it's breathing through its gills. They have to have a covering of water. So if woodlice dry out, they can't breathe and they suffocate. They suffocate in air, just like a sea life would do if you took it out of its pond for too long and dried it out. So they're not insects, and it's really interesting to start thinking about what is and isn't an insect when you're rummaging about and looking for wildlife. A lot of the stuff, perhaps even most of the stuff that you are looking at, is not an insect. Count its legs. Centipedes have got a lot more than 6 legs, definitely not insects. Millipedes, even more legs, even more not an insect. Beetles, yes, absolutely. They've got 6 legs and they've got wings, Some of the wings have been fused into those hard cases. Ladybirds are a really good example. Those red things on the back, that shell is actually 2 of its wings that are fused into a case to protect the soft wings underneath. They're insects, but these things here are not. So let's just see what else we can find. See if we can find some other examples of things that aren't insects. It's mainly woodlice, I think. But the great thing about the microscope is we can zoom in a bit closer, and then if there's anything really, really tiny hiding in here, we might just see it. So there's something there, look, can you see that? Now that little tiny thing there, oh, there it is, that's a springtail. And that's a really, really ancient kind of, oh, in fact it sprang. Did you see that? It suddenly vanished, and that's because springtails have an amazing thing that looks a bit like a handbrake underneath, and they can use it to escape from predators, or if it's too hot or too warm or too bright. It was too bright there for that springtail. It leapt out of the way because it felt in danger. But just as soon as we zoomed in, we could see something much smaller than a woodlouse. So let's do that again. Let's see what else we can find. That's a bit out of focus. Let's get it in focus. Okay, so see how wet that wood is. If you want wildlife in your garden, get some old rotten wood, because it's just like a sponge. It fills up with water, and it keeps that water there, and that's fantastic for all sorts of things that need wet conditions. So wet, soggy wood is great for things to live in, but it's also quite important food for all sorts of things that just chew on dead wood. We'll dig down a bit deeper. Get it lined up in the middle. Oh, there's a woodlouse. Let's zoom in and just have a closer look at a woodlouse, perhaps. Can you see how armoured it is? Those hard plates, 7 legs down either side, feelers so it can test the ground as it's walking along, feeling its way, making sure everything's okay. So we've got plenty of woodlice. We might have a worm or two and perhaps some other springtails. Let's dig right down into this little bit here. See what we've got. Oh, there's something there. Look, can you see that? Very long antennae there. That looks like a little mite. Look how enormously long though. Oh, it's about to get trampled over by woodlouse. Oh dear, doesn't seem to mind. Let's get it in focus. And look at that. Look at that fantastic thing. There's something squirming to the side, but just have a look at that mite. See those huge, long feelers, those antennae. And mites are everywhere. They're probably the commonest thing in the soil are mites. And mites are what we call arachnids, so they're like spiders and scorpions. And they are absolutely everywhere. Really important food for lots of other things. They do lots of important jobs in breaking down bits of dead leaf and bits of dead wood and creating new and useful stuff in the soil for other things to live on, as well as being food themselves. So just give it a bit of a poke. There we go, there it is. See, it's just rummaging about underneath that bit of soil. There it is, coming out the other side. So in this tray, there are probably hundreds of these things. Look at that, it's coming out the other side. Fantastic. So all sorts of things hiding in just a tray of garden soil with a bit of dead wood in it. And you can make this stuff. Why not try and make one of these fantastic nature reserves for yourself? You can put all of this in an old flower pot or something like that. Lots of bits of dead wood, lots of bits of soil, maybe a bit of some grass cuttings or some compost mixed in, and it will fill up with just this kind of wildlife. And if you have a magnifying glass, tip it out into a tray, into a plate, and have a look from time to time. Put it all back again because it will still fill up with more wildlife, and see what you've got in your little mini nature reserve, which is more or less what this is. Let's just get that in focus. Look at that deadwood. Amazing colours, and some of those colours will be from fungi, toadstools that are growing through that wood, helping to break it down. And that's another kind of life that's in here. That's perfect. So what we've got here is an absolutely fantastic spider. This is called a ground spider. They're called Clubiona. And these rush about on the ground. They don't make webs to catch the things they feed on. They catch things on foot. They make a little silken web to lay their eggs in. And sometimes you find that if you turn over a stone or something like that, you see a little sticky bundle of silk. Oh, he's on the move. And that's probably one of these kind of spiders where it's laid its eggs. But they catch their food by chasing it down. They don't need to make a web. So that's great. That's something new and interesting in our tray. Very good. Okay, so look what we've got here. It's a bumblebee. It's a dead bumblebee. Now that's not unusual. Lots of bumblebees just don't make it through the winter. The queens will hibernate and come out in the spring, but sometimes it's too cold, or the place they chose to hibernate just doesn't work. So finding dead bumblebees, or perhaps one that's woken up too early and it's just been too cold, there's been a frost or something like that. But have a look. It's not just a dead bumblebee, it has life on it. Can you see this? These little crawly things. Now these are mites again. These are different kinds of mites to that amazing long-legged soil mite we saw a minute ago. And these little mites are often carried from one bumblebee nest to the next on bumblebees. Sometimes you'll see a bumblebee and it looks completely infested in these little blobs. It looks in terrible distress, but it's probably not. It's probably just transporting these things. They're hitching a ride from one place to another. And these mites are the sorts of things that will be feeding on all the debris, all the bits of leftover stuff at the bottom of a bumblebee's nest. There's bits of wax, there's bits of pollen, there's perhaps dead grubs, there's perhaps bits of old bumblebees in there. There's all sorts of stuff in there, and it's recycling all of that material by feeding on it. And they travel from one bee nest to another, or from one bee nest to a flower, and then onto the next bee and onto the next bee nest. So that's really extraordinary to be able to see that right in front of our eyes. So here's a dead bumblebee, poor thing, but it still had its little passengers, its mites, that have now escaped out into the soil in our tray, and we'll put them back out in the real world very shortly, and they'll wait until they have another chance to hitch a ride on a bumblebee to the next bee's nest. But let's just have a look at how extraordinarily beautiful these bees' wings are. Can you see? The closer we look, the more we can see that they're covered in little hairs, little hooks. Now bees have 4 wings like most insects. Flies only have 2 wings, but they have 2 little kind of leftover wings called halteres. But bees, wasps, they all have 4 wings. 2 big ones at the front, 2 little ones at the back, and they are hooked into each other with just these kinds of hairs, stiff bristles that connect their wings together. But you can see how they're held together by this pattern of veins that keeps the wings stiff. But they're only little wings for quite a big. Let's zoom out. It's a big old insect really, and a heavy one too. So it's amazing how efficient they are at flying, considering how cumbersome they look. So 4 wings, 6 legs, that's definitely an insect, not like our woodlice. Or our spider. So our spider had 8 legs. So it's just like those mites, 8 legs, an arachnid, not an insect. So when you're out having a look at this stuff, count the legs. If it's got 6, it's almost certainly an insect. If it hasn't, it's not an insect. So straight away you're thinking about wildlife in a different way. Not all mini beasts are insects. Most aren't. So there's a lot there that you can discover about the world around you. There's another little mite coming back. Can you see that? Crawling back. It's had a bit of an explore. It's coming back in the hope that maybe it'll get a ride. Well, I'm afraid it won't.